What are the challenges of winemaking in the present and looking towards the future? Welcome to the third episode of Winemaking Experiences by Enartis, the podcast dedicated to the world of winemaking. In this occasion, we will talk about the importance of stabilizing wines from the microbial point of view to manage the consequences of climate change and consumer demands for quality. Let's discuss step by step how high-quality wine can be obtained using natural alternatives to sulfur dioxide.
Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the new episode of our podcast. This time around, it's dedicated to microbial stability. I will be your host. My name is Oren Frederick. I manage a territory in the Central Valley of California, and I am joined by the lovely Libby Spencer. Hello.
Hi, Oren. My name is Libby Spencer, and I'm the sales manager for Enartis USA.
Thanks for joining me, Libby. It's good to see you again.
It's a pleasure.
I'm so excited to have you joining me, Libby. In addition to our conversation that we will have, we'll also get to hear through our summary from Sara Callejon, who is a PhD microbiologist, as well as hearing from Francisco Javier Olleta, who is a sales technician in northern Spain, also working for Enartis, of course. So, Libby, one thing that I know a lot of people have been talking about are different changing conditions in whether it be the environment, whether it be where they're getting their grapes, how they're making their wine, and how different evaluating conditions are causing differences in maybe their microbial nature of their wine. Is that something you're seeing as well?
Absolutely. Something that I have seen and something that Sarah mentions in this conversation on the podcast is that with climate change, we're seeing a lot of defects emerge that we haven't seen before. And as a result, there are some solutions that we've needed to develop to avoid or prevent some of those issues that were much less frequent. But now we're seeing increased temperatures, of course, water stress, and other challenges caused by climate change, like the grape ripening sample has changed completely. We find earlier harvests, delayed phenolic ripening of grapes, increase in sugar and consequently more alcohol, and a decrease in total acidity. Then here in the US anyway, we've seen a lot more instances of calcium instability. And we're also, of course, then dealing with fire and smoke issues.
Wow. It sounds like a lot of things are changing. They're all really changing pretty rapidly. What sort of options do we have? It seems like right now the thing that comes to my mind is SO2, but that can't possibly handle all of these changing factors effectively, by itself at least.
Yeah, something that Sarah said that really surprised me is she said it used to be almost impossible to find species like lactobacillus or pediococcus in a final wine because their susceptibility increased more as alcohol content increased. So I think what she's saying is that actually some of these microbes have adapted. Of course they have. Life finds a way. If Jurassic Park taught us anything, that these microbes have found a way to exist in higher alcohol media, which I thought was pretty fascinating.
Yeah, that is something that I've definitely come across speaking to certain winemakers where in the past you maybe didn't have to be so well versed in what pediococcus or lactobacillus might look at or take the form of in your wine, and now it's, to your point, they're stronger, better, faster, and able to survive in a natural wine environment.
And to answer your question that I totally evaded, your question was about potassium metabisulfite and the tools that we're using to manage these microbes. And of course, I forgot to mention in some of the changes that we're seeing based on climate change, of course, the biggest one I would say locally is higher pH wines. And potassium metabisulfite does a few things. We all know it's an antimicrobial. It has antimicrobial properties and also is an antioxidant. And it's not particularly good at either of those things. It's just the tool that we've always used. But for higher pH wines, it doesn't do a darn thing for microbial stability, really. I'm being dramatic, but it's certainly not the best tool.
Yeah, I know that when I was first learning about winemaking and working in the lab, that initial thought was, oh yeah, wine will come in around a pH of 3.3, 3.4. And that really isn't much the reality in a lot of different regions, especially considering this climate change. So the ability to look at options that aren't reliant on that pH, I think is pretty critical. At least I would imagine if I were a winemaker, I'd want an option that didn't require me to either hit a wine with acid, pick at like 18 bricks or something before the acid's matured to make sure that we're actually, able to protect it in its lifetime.
Well, you're right. And also, I'm sure all of our listeners are familiar with that graph that shows how much sulfur you need to add based on the pH of a wine. And of course, if we're trying to achieve microbial stability and be in that 0.5 to 0.8 milligrams per liter to control, we have to add so much SO2 that the wine is effectively undrinkable.
Using sometimes 4 times more SO2 to do the same protection that they were doing, let's say 20, 30 years ago with lower pHs.
You're right. It would be one thing if we were adding marginally more SO2, a few more ppm, but like you said, it's literally 4 times more.
When I think about SO2, I think of it as an antioxidant, and that might be my own problem, where I'm not thinking of it also as a bioprotectant, which of course it is as well. But I think that idea of bioprotection tools, which Sarah and Javier speak about pretty extensively, and they use that term, bioprotection.
I think the most exciting bioprotection tool that we have, as an industry, have come out with, but specifically at Enartis, is the use of chitosan, which is something that's used in lots of industries. It's a product that I'm still learning a lot of our winemakers don't know about. So just to really clarify what that is, I know a lot of people are familiar with lysozyme, certainly, and chitosan is sort of I think of it as a better version of lysozyme for a number of reasons. Number one, lysozyme is an allergen product. It's an animal-derived product, and it only works with lactic acid bacteria, not acetic acid bacteria, and also not spoilage yeast, whereas chitosan can do all of those things. So it's a broad spectrum antimicrobial agent that can be added at any point in the winemaking process, whether that's at grape reception, if you're concerned about the microbial load coming in from the vineyard. It can be used to hold off malolactic fermentation. It can be used if there's a specific acetobacter issue or any other kind of contamination happening during élevage. One of the features of Enartis Stab Micro M that differentiates it from other chitosan products on the market is that it's an activated formulation. And what that means is that it's been washed in organic acids, which makes it more reactive upon contact. Right as you add it, and as soon as there's contact, we see the chitosan interact with the microorganisms. And there are a number of competitor products on the market that take a lot longer for that reaction to occur.
That's great. I'm really excited to hear that we have kind of like a one shot tool that kind of can approach the wine at any stage of its life, even before it's wine.
It's incredible. And in fact, right now at ASCV, which is a technical conference here in the US, it's in California, in Napa right now. That's where you are, right, Oren?
I am. Don't tell anybody. Everyone's here looking at me. I'm in front of a stage, actually. Just kidding.
We've got a poster at ASCV showing the benefits of Stab Micro M in wine.
We do. There's a lot of good research that comes out of this conference, and we're excited to be a part of it.
Good.
So, Libby, we talk about Stab Micro, chitosan. It seems like a really effective approach for, let's say, a one pass through for a wine at whatever stage it is in its life. Is there anything that offers lasting protection that we can offer similar to SO2?
Yeah, so the other important bit, so I think chitosan is best for that antimicrobial portion of what potassium metabisulfite has traditionally offered to winemaking. For antioxidant protection and more, I'll get back to your question, is the use of tannin. So we know that tannins have different properties and applications during the winemaking process, of course, and some tannins have greater antioxidant power than others. We have spent a lot of time and energy and money to understand the nature and origin of tannins and evaluating their different effects. So we carried out a project to create a mixture of tannins with a very high antioxidant effect and bacteriostatic power. So through a selection and purification process, we were able to develop a technical tannin with those two properties, antioxidant and bacteriostatic, and it's called hideki, which is a Japanese word that means a splendid opportunity.
Love it. I think that it also fits so well with what we're talking about and what it can offer. One thing that in this conversation that Javier has with Sarah is that he mentions polyphenols are a little bit like plant antibodies, which I found to be an interesting point that I hadn't really thought of in that way.
Absolutely. So, of course, when plants are attacked by microorganisms or molds or other pathogens, even things like hail, weather events, they secrete these substances to defend themselves. Through a selection and purification process, we can determine if a tannin is suitable for one enological application or another.
That feels really exciting to me, hearing that, in the sense that it seems like we are using tools that plants have been using for, I don't want to speak out of turn, but it sounds like almost centuries, and we're finding ways to use it in our own processes that we've been doing here in terms, in this case, winemaking.
I really like the approach, which is nature is pretty clever. And so the idea that grapes find a way to defend themselves using that technology that the grapes have perfected over millennia, it seems like a much easier way to learn than it is for us to develop a synthetic way to defend wine against microbes.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I love thinking about this approach in the sense that we are just using what nature's already figured out, and we're just finding a way to use it ourselves.
Absolutely.
Feels very in line with the climate change and living more, let's say, naturally within our environment. It's the only environment we have, right?
Holistically.
There you go. That's a good word for it. One point that Javier mentions in his conversation with Sarah is that sweet wines have that potential, of course, to re-ferment. What sort of options do we have to avoid that re-fermentation that might happen with a sweet wine or a wine with residual sugar in it?
Yeah, a few options. So one that's been around a long time is potassium sorbate, and that can absolutely help. The challenge with sorbate is that it can give some off aromas, such as that geranium taint, which nobody wants. Another option is dimethyl dicarbonate, if that's available to you. And then, of course, sterile filtration is another great option.
Libby, it's been great chatting so far, but let's take a quick break and hear from a customer in Spain about how they're using Enartis Stab Micro M in their organic wine production.
Hello, I'm Carlos Rubio, Technical Director of Bodegas Corral in Navarrete, La Rioja. We produce 100% organic wines from 100% organic grapes and export to 25 countries. We work with all the varieties that can be found in Rioja, as well as other areas, from Rioja Baja to Rioja Oriental to Rioja Alta, but mainly from Moncavillo and Rioja Alavesa. Our grapes have a wide variety of different characteristics. We also use an array of wine vessels with a range of materials and sizes, from concrete to clay amphora to stainless steel and oak. When we started to use the Enartis Stab Micro M, the pre-activated chitosan from Enartis, we entered a new phase of our winemaking evolution. Our goals have always been to produce wines that are increasingly natural, but also with a long shelf life. We produce wines destined for long aging, both in barrel and in bottle, so we must carefully protect against the growth of unwanted microorganisms. One of our major goals is the reduction of SO2. We are already making wines with a zero SO2 protocol, and the use of Enartis Stab Micro M is key to that. It has become essential to ensure that our wines, which are exported all over the world, can reach the consumer as clean as possible and with the top standard of quality.
Great. I think that was a pretty good summary of what we've been talking about in regards to bioprotection and what options you have with organic winemaking. Obviously, organic is a legal distinction, so depending on where you're listening from this podcast, hello to you, wherever you are. Please check with your local regulations to be sure. But Enartis Stab Micro M does seem like a really helpful tool for those low SO2 winemaking challenges if you're allowed to use it in your organic winemaking. What do you think, Libby?
I agree. I know organic winemaking is a difficult topic around the world since there are so many organizations that set those standards. But I'm really glad to know that this is a useful tool in some parts of the world. So, Oren, another topic that was mentioned in the podcast was about microbiological control through malolactic fermentation. So very often winemakers think about MLF as a sensory choice, adding creaminess and softness to a wine by converting malic acid into lactic acid. But of course, it's also an important biocontrol moment that we don't want to leave a bunch of malic acid in the wine that could then be available for lots of other microorganisms to consume and create off flavors and aromas such as acetic acid.
For sure. I think there's a lot of times where I've spoken with winemakers where they've had a wine that suddenly started malolactic without their control over it. And a lot of times that leads to taking a great, promising wine and kind of turning it flabby, something that's high color, full of structure, strong fruit notes. And after this spontaneous MLF, it's just like, bleh.
Yeah, and I think you using the
term.
word yes. And saying spontaneous, I think, is important because I know a lot of folks like to leave this step as a natural step and just allow whatever microbe to complete the malolactic fermentation. And of course, people can make wine in whatever style they prefer, but I think it's valuable to note that if the goal is to convert the malic acid into lactic acid using a strain that we know does that in a clean and complete way, would certainly be the safest choice in terms of bioprotection.
Yeah, and one tool I've also seen, or maybe not a tool, but more of an approach, is co-inoculating with these selected strains. So you, ahead of time, already have your wine protected as it goes through primary and secondary fermentation.
Absolutely. I think co-inoculation is a really great strategy, and it has a lot of advantages over sequential inoculation. Perhaps most importantly is that it gives the bacteria time to acclimate to the increasing alcohol concentration. And then also we don't have to heat the tank as we so often do post-fermentation. We can make use of that natural heat of the fermentation.
Yeah, it's really important to make sure that we're also reducing the time between the alcoholic, the primary and the secondary fermentation.
Absolutely. We got to save some time.
Yeah, a lot of times, especially with large wineries, the tank transition where you have 30 tanks and you have 50 ferments, you got to be able to turn over that tank pretty quickly. So having the ability to complete fermentation effectively and still retain that quality is pretty critical.
Absolutely.
Plus, if there's any sort of growth, like let's say with acetic as it sits in tank waiting for MLF or what have you, those problems can be really difficult to address after they take hold, right? Once you get that acetic bacteria in there, Acidobacter.
You're right. And it seems like as we started this conversation with climate change, we're seeing more and more instances of grape degradation right when they come into the winery. And so we know that acetic acid population is very often higher than we want it to be. So anything we can do to control that is beneficial.
Yeah. And Acidobacter, I know I keep mentioning it, but it's so resilient in terms of a strain. I know that sounds so positive. If you are measuring volatile acidity or acetic acid at your winery, once that pops up, often you're just identifying a problem that's already there. So
and it's full steam ahead.
Oh yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the final step, hopefully, in a wine's life, which is filtration, right? That last final time to really make sure your wine is stable, clean, ready to go on the shelf anywhere from 2 days from now to 2 years or 20 years, depending on what wine you're making in your market. What sort of conditions should winemakers be thinking about, Libby, at this final stage of the winemaking process?
Yeah, the filtration is one of the most important and critical steps, because if you don't filter properly, the consequences can be dire. It's the last chance to make sure everything is microbiologically stable, and we sure don't want to see any re-fermentation in the bottle. So sterile filtration is obviously the simplest solution to this, but we certainly see a lot of winemakers who want to bottle wine unfiltered, and that's fine so long as you've covered all your bases and done all the necessary testing.
Yeah, I know that in our internal lab here in the United States, we've gotten a couple customers provide bottles to us that with particulates, and when we look at it under the microscope, we're seeing abundance of microorganisms that are having a great old time in the bottle, which isn't so great for us, great for them, I suppose.
No, that's a nightmare.
Yeah, do you think that this is caused by a lack of maintenance or sanitization of the filters? What sort of problems can arise to this?
Well, gosh, I mean, no filter is perfect, and filtration logically is not perfect. So we really have to work from the beginning of the process to make the wine that we want to make. Now, the simplest way, of course, is that wines are not only sugar dry, but malic dry. So that way there are fewer things to re-ferment or cause microbial issues. But of course, that's not the case for all wines. And so if you want wine with residual sugar, and if you want wine that hasn't gone through malolactic fermentation, we just have to be extra cautious and extra clean and extra careful and follow very strong QC, QA protocols to make sure that the wine has the greatest opportunity to be safe in the bottle.
Yeah, and thinking back on the conversation we just had, it seems like there are a lot of solutions. You just need to make sure you're utilizing them in the right way. That this is absolutely it's absolutely possible to bottle a wine with residual sugar with the potential for microbial growth while still minimizing or eliminating the risk entirely if you do it the right way.
Absolutely.
So, Libby, we talk a little bit about, or maybe a lot about, different product strategies, things that you can add and utilize in your wine. I wonder, are there any equipment-based or engineering-based approaches that a winery might be able to take to solve some of these problems as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I tend to really think about things with an additive or product approach, because I've been with Enartis for 11 years, and that's my default. But of course, there's mechanical options for all kinds of problems too. Enartis engineering is a newer department that's been really successful in some countries, particularly in Spain, and it's something that we're expanding throughout the world. One of the product ranges that's not yet available in the US, but I expect will be in the coming months or years, is the Enartis Pour range, which is filtration media and cartridges and those kinds of things. And that is available in some of our countries around the world.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that as we get further along.
Me too.
Another thing I would be remiss to not mention is that cleaning and sanitation is a really critical step with any equipment that you're using at a winery, whether it be tank, filter, pumps, all of that. It's really important to keep that clean.
Everybody needs a luminometer.
Absolutely, they do. Well, Libby, thank you so much for joining me during this podcast.
Oren, thanks for having me. This was really fun. One of my favorite things about working for Enartis is being able to share information from around the world. I feel really blessed to work for a multinational company that has a reach in winemaking countries all over this world. And we have some of the smartest people in the industry. And it's so fun to get to share this information to a broader audience. So thanks for doing this.
Yeah, I agree. It's also really nice to be able to hear about problems that to know that the problems we're facing are global in nature and that we're all in it together, right? We're not just a local winemaking community. We really are a global one.
Absolutely. It makes me feel connected.
Well,
part of a microbiome, if you will.
Oh, look, full circle, right? In this case, a healthy microbiome that we appreciate and desire. All right, well, Libby, have a good rest of your day. And to all of our listeners, have a good rest of your day, evening, morning, what have you. And we'll see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Oren. Bye.